On a cold evening, a weary homeless veteran sat quietly on the steps of a busy downtown street. His clothes were tattered, his hands calloused, his eyes dim with years of pain and survival. A cardboard sign rested by his feet. "Can I play for food?" Some laughed, others sneered, assuming he was just another beggar. But what they didn't know was that behind the worn face and weathered hands was a man who once played for packed concert halls, admired by the world as a piano legend. Tonight, destiny would reveal his secret again. The evening rush filled the air with the usual sounds of honking horns, hurried footsteps, and conversations spilling out of nearby cafes. People walked past the veteran without giving him a second glance. His long, unkempt beard and faded army jacket made him appear invisible in a world that had forgotten him. Children tugged at their parents, whispering questions, only to be shushed. A group of young men, perhaps college students, stopped and noticed his sign, "Can I play it for food?" They smirked at one another. "What's he gonna play, air piano?" One joked, loud enough for the veteran to hear. Another added, "Maybe he thinks this is America's Got Talent." Their laughter rang out, sharp and cruel, piercing the already heavy silence the old man carried within. The veteran lowered his eyes, his pride aching, but he didn't respond. His fingers twitched, craving keys they hadn't touched in years. His stomach growled, but his hunger wasn't just for food, it was for dignity, for the chance to be seen again as more than a shadow of the man he used to be. Nearby, a restaurant owner stepped out, brushing crumbs off his apron. He spotted the group laughing and glanced at the veteran. With a scoff, he muttered, "Move along, old man. You're scaring away customers." He pointed toward the alley as though directing trash. The veteran's jaw tightened, but he remained still, silent. Just as the tension seemed unbearable, a teenage girl with headphones around her neck stopped. She tilted her head, reading the sign. Instead of mocking, she asked softly, "Do you play piano?" The veteran lifted his gaze slowly, his tired eyes meeting hers. He gave the smallest nod. "I used to," he whispered. Her curiosity sparked. "There's a piano inside the hotel lobby down the street," she said. "If you really play, show them." Her words were not a challenge but an invitation, a lifeline extended in kindness. The group of boys burst out laughing again. "Yeah, let's see it. This is gonna be hilarious." Their mockery only fueled the curiosity of passers-by, who began to slow down and watch. A crowd was forming, unknowingly gathering for a performance they would never forget. With effort, the veteran pushed himself up. His legs wobbled, weak from both hunger and time. He leaned on the wall for balance, his jacket sagging on his frail frame. Yet within his chest, a quiet fire stirred, the fire of a man who once commanded respect with every note he played. Tonight, he would try to awaken it again. The veteran followed the teenage girl toward the hotel lobby, his steps uneven but determined. The boys trailed behind, snickering, filming on their phones, already preparing for the funny clip they thought they'd capture. The girl, however, walked with a quiet conviction, almost as if she sensed something in him that the others couldn't see. The lobby was warm, with polished marble floors that gleamed under golden chandeliers. A grand piano sat in the corner, untouched, its black lacquer reflecting the light like a mirror. The moment the veteran saw it, his chest tightened. Memories surged, crowds roaring, the stage lights burning hot on his skin, the first note of a symphony carrying through an auditorium. It had been years, but the piano felt like an old friend waiting patiently for his return. A hotel clerk noticed the group entering. His expression twisted with annoyance as his eyes landed on the ragged figure. "Sir, you can't just bring him in here," the clerk said sharply. "This is private property." Before the veteran could lower his head in shame, the girl stepped in front of him. "Please," she said firmly. "Just let him play one song. If he's bad, we'll leave." The boys smirked, whispering, "This is gonna be gold on TikTok." The clerk hesitated, glancing at the curious faces gathering near the entrance. For a moment, he considered throwing them out, but then shrugged. "Fine, one song, but if there's trouble, you're out." The veteran approached the piano slowly, like a soldier stepping back onto a battlefield. His hands trembled as he reached for the keys, not from fear but from the weight of years and memories pressing down on him. He lowered himself onto the bench, his back slightly hunched, his reflection staring back at him in the piano's glossy surface. The crowd quieted, even the boys stopped laughing for a second, sensing something shift. The veteran placed his fingers gently on the ivory keys, his calloused skin brushing against the smooth surface. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and pressed the first chord. It rang out pure and full, echoing across the lobby like a voice long silenced. Conversations hushed. People turned. Something powerful and raw hung in the air. The veteran's hands, though weathered, moved with grace and precision. Each note flowed into the next, building into a melody that seemed to rise from his very soul. The girl's eyes widened in awe. The boys who once laughed now stared, their smirks fading into disbelief. The clerk froze behind the desk, his jaw slack. Guests emerging from the elevators paused, captivated. The hotel lobby transformed into a concert hall, every ear tuned to the sound of redemption. With each phrase, the veteran wasn't just playing music, he was telling a story. The notes carried pain, love, war, loss, and resilience. His body leaned into the instrument, as though pouring his very being into the keys. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't a homeless man or a beggar. He was an artist, a legend reborn. And the crowd knew it. The music flowed like a river unleashed, carrying everyone in the lobby along with it. The veteran's fingers danced with effortless precision, weaving a melody that seemed to defy the years of hardship carved into his face. It was haunting yet beautiful, a mixture of sorrow and triumph. The crowd that had gathered stood in stunned silence, as if afraid that even a whisper might break the spell. Some closed their eyes, swaying gently to the sound. Others raised their phones, not to mock, but to capture the rare moment of magic unfolding before them. The boys who once laughed now stood frozen, their earlier cruelty dissolved into awe. Even they couldn't deny the brilliance echoing through the room. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit stepped closer, his brow furrowed in recognition. He leaned toward the hotel clerk. That piece, it's not something an amateur could play. He stopped, his eyes widening. That's Reverie Number 9 by Jonathan Hale. Only one man in the world could play it like this. Who? The clerk whispered, his voice trembling. The man's jaw tightened. Daniel Carter, the piano prodigy. He vanished years ago after serving overseas. The name spread through the lobby like wildfire. Daniel Carter, a woman gasped, recalling magazine covers from decades past. A young man searched his phone frantically and held up an old photo. There he was, a younger version of the same man now sitting at the piano, dressed in a tuxedo. Shaking hands with presidents, filling Carnegie Hall with thunderous applause. The veteran, Daniel Carter, played on, unaware of the whispers. For him, this wasn't about fame. It was about survival, about proving to himself that he still existed beyond the scars of war and the bitterness of poverty. Tears welled in the eyes of the teenage girl who had given him the chance. She clutched her phone to her chest, watching as the melody painted pictures she couldn't describe. She saw not a homeless man, but a warrior and an artist, reclaiming the part of himself the world had tried to erase. By the time Daniel struck the final chord, the lobby was transformed. Silence hung for a heartbeat, then the room erupted in applause. Guests cheered, some standing on chairs to clap harder, others wiping tears from their cheeks. The sound was deafening, not mocking but reverent, as though they had witnessed something sacred. Daniel lifted his hands from the keys slowly, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling. He looked around in confusion, as if unsure why strangers were clapping for him. He wasn't used to it anymore. Applause had once been his life, but now it felt like a dream he had long buried. The suited man pushed forward through the crowd. "Mr. Carter," he said firmly, "I never thought I'd see you again. You were, a legend. What happened to you?" Daniel blinked, his lips parting but no words escaping. His eyes glistened as decades of silence and struggle pressed heavily on him. He lowered his gaze, ashamed to answer. But the girl beside him touched his arm gently and whispered, "You don't have to explain. They know who you are now." The applause still echoed in the marble lobby as Daniel sat frozen at the piano, his trembling hands resting on his knees. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected anyone to remember him, let alone recognize him. For years, he had lived in shadows, his music silenced by the roar of war and the sting of loss. Now, the sound of clapping filled his ears once more, but instead of pride, it stirred a flood of memories. The suited man knelt beside him. "Mr. Carter," he said softly, his voice tinged with reverence. "You vanished after your military service. The world thought you were gone forever. You were the pride of American classical music. Where have you been all these years?" Daniel swallowed hard, his throat ached, words heavy like lead. "War," he murmured finally, his voice raw. "I served. I came back, but not the same. His eyes grew distant, glassy with the reflection of memories he rarely allowed himself to face. The music stopped making sense after what I saw. Crowds cheering felt wrong when brothers in arms never came home. And when the silence got too loud, I drifted. Lost my way. The lobby hushed. Even the teenagers who had mocked him minutes ago bowed their heads, shame burning on their faces. The girl who had brought him here squeezed his arm gently, her eyes brimming with compassion. Daniel glanced down at his worn jacket, at the patches that marked him as a veteran. I had everything once. Fame, money, stages filled with light. But out there, none of it mattered. When I came back, the world had moved on. I didn't know how to live in it anymore. His voice cracked, and he blinked back tears. So, I played only when I was hungry. Music became my last way to ask the world to notice me. A hush fell over the crowd. Many felt their throats tighten, their eyes sting. They weren't just hearing the story of a man, they were hearing the story of countless forgotten veterans who had given everything, only to return to nothing. The hotel clerk, who had earlier tried to throw him out, stepped forward awkwardly. "Sir, I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't know." Daniel looked at him but said nothing. His silence spoke louder than words. The suited man rose to his feet and turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at Daniel Carter, the man who once graced the greatest stages of America. He is not gone. He is here, and we owe him more than applause." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Someone started clapping again, this time slower, deeper, more meaningful. It spread like wildfire, growing into a standing ovation. But this was not the applause of fans for a celebrity, it was gratitude, respect, and recognition for a man who had endured, who had survived, and who was finding his way back through music. Daniel bowed his head, tears slipping down his weathered cheeks. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. The hotel lobby no longer felt like a lobby, it had transformed into a sacred hall of memory and redemption. Daniel sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the tidal wave of emotions that surged through him. His hands trembled, not from weakness this time, but from the weight of the moment. The crowd waited, holding their breath, silently urging him to continue. The teenage girl whispered, "Play another, please." Daniel looked at her, his tired eyes softening. Something about her belief in him cut through the layers of shame and doubt that had chained him for years. Slowly, he raised his hands again, placing them gently on the keys. This time, he didn't play a grand piece from the world's great composers. He played something of his own, a song born in the trenches of war, carved out of nights filled with explosions and mornings haunted by silence. The melody carried grief, but also hope, sorrow, but also resilience. Each note felt like a prayer for the fallen, a hymn for the forgotten, a love letter to the life he had almost lost. The music flowed into the hearts of everyone listening. Guests held hands. The boys who had mocked him now filmed with reverence, their expressions humbled. The hotel clerk leaned forward on the counter, tears staining his crisp uniform. Even the suited man, who had recognized him, pressed his palm to his mouth to stifle his sobs. Daniel's body swayed with the rhythm, his eyes closed, his soul pouring out through the keys. For a moment, he was not the homeless veteran, not the broken man cast aside by the world. He was once again Daniel Carter, the legend, the maestro, the man who could make a piano speak to the deepest corners of the human spirit. As the final note lingered in the air, silence fell like a blanket over the room. It was not the silence of indifference but the silence of hearts too full to speak. Then, as though on cue, the entire lobby rose to their feet. The ovation was thunderous, shaking the very walls. But what mattered most to Daniel was not the volume, it was the look in their eyes. For the first time in years, they weren't looking at him with pity or mockery. They were looking at him with respect. The girl threw her arms around him, whispering, "You're amazing." Daniel's lips curved into a small, trembling smile. He hadn't heard those words in so long. The suited man approached again, this time with determination. "Mr. Carter, the world needs to hear you again. Let me help. I can arrange concerts, interviews, anything. You deserve to be remembered, not forgotten." Daniel hesitated, his heart caught between fear and hope. For years, he had hidden, convinced that his time was over. But now, staring into the crowd that cheered and cried for him, he realized something he had forgotten: music was never about fame. It was about connection, about healing, not just for the audience, but for himself. He nodded slowly, tears shimmering in his eyes. It's time. The crowd erupted once more, their applause carrying the weight of redemption. That night in the hotel lobby became more than just an unexpected performance, it became a story that spread far beyond those walls. Videos of Daniel Carter's playing flooded social media, reaching millions within hours. The world that had forgotten him was suddenly reminded of the genius they once adored. Headlines called him the lost maestro, and the homeless veteran who played his way back. But for Daniel, the real victory wasn't fame, it was dignity. For years, he had felt invisible, discarded by the very society he had once inspired. That night, through music, he found himself again. The laughter that once mocked him was replaced with applause, respect, and tears of gratitude. The teenage girl who believed in him became his unlikely angel, the spark that reignited his purpose. Concert halls would soon invite him back, but more importantly, he found peace in knowing that his story wasn't over. Daniel Carter had lived as a soldier, suffered as a forgotten man, and risen again as a musician. His life proved that even in brokenness, beauty can still be born, and that sometimes, the world just needs to listen.